Let me follow up on one adult in the room aspect because it's tricky, it strikes me. So in the summer wave, it seemed as if Democrats were motivated by the abortion decision, yes, by gun control, and by the democracy issue. And now we think the Republicans are riding a wave consisting of immigration, crime, and inflation. But this democracy issue, I think for many of us seems as real as can be. And John, you had a tweet suggesting that Dems should try to ride it. But is that the kind of arcane graduate school value that just can't compete against high gas prices? Can it really have? I mean, it's never in my lifetime been so acute. But is it possible to actually make it, drive turnout and votes?
So you have to distinguish between turnout and votes. So
Okay, good point.
democracy
Yeah.
is not a voting issue, meaning it doesn't mobilize large numbers of what they call sporadic voters who don't vote usually in midterms. It doesn't mobilize those voters by itself. But what it does do is it mobilizes Democratic volunteers, Democrats who are willing to stop wringing their hands and start ringing doorbells. And they need an army. The largest army there's ever been is 1 million in the 2008 Obama campaign, 1 million ground troops for Democrats. They're not going to get to that this year, but the closer they get to that number, the better chance they have, because midterms are always turnout elections.
That's right.
So democracy is a great issue for getting volunteers out there in the next couple of weeks, people to use the call tools where they can call into other states. And, if they can get a better than expected turnout, and by the way, the early voting in Georgia suggests turnout is going to be more like 2018 than 2014 when nobody showed up and the Democrats got clobbered. So they need that big turnout, and democracy is a very important piece of this. But the idea of kind of ignoring inflation and saying, oh, if we don't talk about it, people will vote on abortion, that strategy has failed. They need to go right at inflation, but blame it on corporate America.
Well, I was just going to point out a couple things about all this. One is that in 2018 and 2020, Trump was the villain, right? And, for us, Trump is still a villain because we're paying very close attention to the threat that he and his movement continue to pose. But I think for a lot of less engaged voters, in 2018 and 2020, you had that kind of big orange face screaming at you all the time with all sorts of deranged tweets day in and day out. And, it was a really, I think, a very telling thing when when large groups of Democratic voters would show up at the airports to argue against the Muslim ban. That was, to me, a sign very early that we were seeing an uncommon level of energy, political energy on the ground during a midterm election. Remember, in 2018, it was historically high turnout for a midterm. So the code can be cracked in a midterm. You just need that villain. And look, Nancy Pelosi and Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee have done a very good job of dramatizing the threat. But on some level, unless you've just got that guy in the White House just shrieking in your face with all sorts of obscenities and, racism and misogyny, it's a bit sad to think that that's what it takes, but I fear that it is.
But there is another villain, and that's the Supreme Court. And it's a pretty good villain for the Democrats this year. And one of the, before everybody on the Democratic side gets all depressed about the outcome, we don't know what the power of the Dobbs decision is going to be. And there's some indications from some special elections that it could be very significant. And you could have large numbers of, what I call, in the trade is called sporadic voters, people who don't normally vote in midterm elections, especially women, but also including a lot of younger men who are concerned about getting their girlfriends pregnant. and that, they are going to show up. And if that happens, it's going to be a very close election.
Can I ask? I'd love to throw something out there for discussion. I talked to Pat Ryan after his surprise victory in the Hudson Valley. Remember, he outperformed polls, and turnout was a big part of this. And that was when I think anxiety over Roe was kind of at full boil. And what he said to me was interesting. He said, on the ground, democracy absolutely is a galvanizing issue. And I wonder if what it took to make democracy a galvanizing issue was the overturning of Roe, the deprivation of rights for millions and millions of people. Maybe voters connected that in their minds to the need to get out and vote to protect those rights.
Yeah, the idea of freedom, I think, was really
Yes.
what was front and center there. And because never in history have we actually lost a right. It's always usually affirming a right or creating one. But taking one away, I think, jolted a lot of people into a reality they never thought they would face here in the United States of America in 2022, especially for women, which is over half the population. So I think that as we get further away from that, though, that the Democrats didn't do a great job of keeping that all together in a very easily digestible way. I'll say keep repeating that because the attention span of the American electorate is very short. Unfortunately, we know this. They're only going to digest but so much. And if you cannot put it in terms that are in your face, this is how it impacts your life every day. This is how it will impact your kids' lives every day. This is why you should care because it matters now. The idea of losing democracy is such an esoteric concept to a lot of people. A lot of people don't understand what our constitutional republic slash democracy actually is, how it functions. I fault the lack of civic education in this country for that. I think it's a travesty. But if people don't understand why they should be fighting for it or what it means if you lose it, then they're not going to be motivated by it to fight for it. That's why at the Lincoln Project we do what we do, why we try to constantly focus on every single issue that's important, but it doesn't matter if we don't have a democracy and the freedom to vote, the freedom to make those choices, the freedom to choose the government in the manner in which it was intended. None of those issues are going to matter if we don't have that anymore. Economic prosperity, all of those things will not matter if you have an autocracy and you lose your democracy. So we try to incorporate that in everything that we do at the Lincoln Project so that there is a through line because people need to understand it. I frankly don't believe enough Americans see the threat to democracy for what it really is. And that's, I think, something that we have to continue to hammer home no matter what.